Welcome everyone to this sort of fifth webinar of the conflict resolution series. I am Sraddhasagar. This is my spiritual name and what people in the yoga community know me by, as well as my students. So this is my sort of teacher name. And then everywhere else in my world, I'm called Ruth Hartung. And today we have Ana Camacho-Hansen with us to talk about conflict resolution for children. And Ana and I have a long relationship that goes back. How many years, Ana, have we known each other? You came to the center with almost
2003.
2003. Okay.
Yes.
Ana came as a student in the yoga teacher training, and then from there became a teacher in the center. And we continued to grow and work with Rama Jyoti Vernon in this area of the conflict resolution. I do want to just say, before I have Ana introduce herself and her background, I want to say a little bit about my interest in this subject matter of children. And I will say that when I started the center in 1998, with my partner then, that we had a program we called the Children's Project. And it was part of our nonprofit. And the Children's Project was made up of the prenatal yoga class that I taught. And then that morphed into the mom and baby yoga class. So after the first prenatal yoga class I taught, there were all these mothers and babies. So then we had to grow with that, and we created the mom and baby yoga program, which ran for many, many, many years, of which Ana was a part of. And the other thing that I did in the early years of the center was I ran a class that was after school, primarily for elementary school children, that was called the Magic Kingdom. And this was yoga. And there were two things that were important to me with this children's project that were sort of framed the classes. And that was one, that I noticed that parents needed support. In order to be great parents, they needed support from their community, especially because in this day and age, people are not always close to the grandparents or the aunts and the uncles that would normally form sort of the cocoon that allows children to grow up in. And so we have these extended families. And so I wanted to create a community where families could come together and be able to brainstorm and talk about their challenges and talk about their joys and that which happened during the days about their children. And then the other piece that I wanted to do was that I also wanted to recognize that children are the future. They are going to be our future leaders. And so there was looking then also, what is it that the children need in order to be great at that? What can we do and offer? What can we fill in that's not being covered by the school system or perhaps by the family? So those were the two kind of pillar stones of the Children's Project, and got me going and involved in these types of programs. So Ana, will you now share a little bit about your background as a teacher and then your entry into the yoga world?
Sure. Yes. I am so happy to be here. Thanks, Shraddha, for inviting me here today. And my background as an educator, I have a background in elementary education. And early on, I really felt like there was this disconnect in the public school system of social and emotional learning curriculum, and not a lot on that when I started teaching children. And but I knew when I first started, it's really funny because my journey with yoga and my journey with teaching children kind of went side by side. I started teaching children in 2000, And I remember that so vividly. My first teaching job, I was really, everything was synchronistic. I was really kind of thrown in the classroom. It kind of gives you an idea about, you know, the teacher shortage that we have in the United States. But I was just in a human resources office for ISA School District in Phoenix, Arizona. And I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna sub for a little bit. I'm not sure what I wanna do in education. I'll just sub. And the principal of one of the schools was like, are you subbing? I have a classroom for you right now. And he just, you know, took me, and we went that day. I got this crash course on education. That was my introduction to education. But what I immediately saw was that I loved working with children. And so during that same time, I was also introduced to a yoga video through my sister at the time, who was living in Boston. And I just kind of fell in love with both things at once. So then immediately, as I went on teaching in elementary school, I immediately saw that there was such a need, such a big need for social and emotional learning. And that's what, in the education world, that's what really yoga falls under: social and emotional learning and physical education. But mostly, I remember thinking and being in a classroom and thinking, you know, they really need some way to clear their mind, and they really need some way to, there is a lot of anxiety around test taking and all of this other stuff. So all of that, my journey with education and with yoga kind of happened together. So then I got more education, yoga education. And as I got more yoga education, studying with Sraddha and studying with Ramajyoti, I started seeing how it could be applicable in the classroom. So I started doing mindfulness, little small exercise, and I didn't even know what to call it then, right? This is 2000 and, 2004 to 2005. It really hasn't, yoga and mindfulness and peace education wasn't really a part of, the classroom yet, and just to let you know, right now is a really exciting time to be in the classroom, because it's kids yoga and kids mindfulness and peace curriculum. It's all happening. It's all being introduced in the classrooms, and the educators are seeing the value of it more now than they ever have before. So that's really exciting. So about 3 years ago, I went into a Montessori classroom, and then I had this whole Montessori education around peace education and peace curriculum. And Dr. Marie Montessori was such an advocate for peace. She has a book, Peace and Education. If you work with children in any capacity, if you want to learn more about peace curriculum or peace education, that's a great book to get. But then that opened my eyes, and I was like, wow, there's this bridge. Here's the bridge. Here we go. So I've been doing yoga and mindfulness, and then suddenly Montessori education opened up my mind into the bridge between all of that. And then in working in the school, so I worked at a Montessori school in Sedona about 3 or 4 years ago. I was the peace coordinator there. So that meant that I ran the peace curriculum for the whole school. And so that's kindergarten, that's first grade all the way up to 8th grade. So I planned out their kids yoga classes, their mindfulness classes, and their peace curriculum classes. And I gave them to teachers for them to implement in their classrooms. And then I just kind of watched it. And I also taught mindfulness too, and taught kids yoga, but we had other kids yoga teachers. We didn't have a lot of mindfulness teachers, so I was responsible for that, but we had kids yoga teachers in lower elementary, so that's first, second, and third grade. So then from that, I loved it so much. It was a great combination, and I felt like it just really was a synchronistic fit, the yoga, the mindfulness, and the peace curriculum. And what I realized after doing it, I did it for 2 years, I realized that we virtually had no bullying. Like it was completely, we had done all the preventative stuff that we needed to do. And we had, the first year we had 3 cases of bullying. The second year we had no cases of bullying. So I felt, wow, this is a really, really great effect of what's happening in the classroom. It's a culture of peace that's happening at the school, and it's showing up. It's actually measurable this way. There was virtually no, well, the second year, there was no bullying at all. There was no, and then arguments and things like that. Of course, there are things, discussions like that, but the children were so empowered. They knew how to handle what they needed to do. So anyway, in observing all of that, I just got really excited about teaching these three things as a way of anti-bullying, and as a way of just teaching peace, conflict resolution. So now what I do is I go into classrooms, and I'm asked to go to certain classrooms and to do this curriculum and to teach this curriculum to teachers and counselors. So that's what I'm doing now. So I'm not a teacher in a classroom. I'm actually focus on kids yoga. I focus on peace curriculum, and I focus on mindfulness. So that's what I do.
Okay, great. How about if we like pull some of this apart? Could you go through the different age groups that you have worked with and what it is that defines the needs of those age groups? And so, for example, what would be the difference between mindfulness for the younger group versus the middle school, et cetera, so that we can kind of get a sense of what you see as the physiological and the psychological development, and then how you address that.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's so important to talk about these aspects. And for parents out there that are, really reflecting upon this work and thinking, how can I apply it to parenting? It definitely applies to parenting in so many ways. But first, developmentally, that's really the lens that you want to look at when you're addressing mindfulness for children. You want to look at, okay, what's their age? What exactly is aspecting them the most at that moment? And what's the journey of that age? What's the journey? Each group has a theme to it. So let's start with middle school. So middle school is this pivotal point of development, child development, is the 9 years. So it's a 9-year change. And I really dove into this when I was doing my Waldorf. I have a background in Waldorf education as well. So that's Rudolf Steiner. And I did a lot of Montessori education as well. So there's this moment in the 9-year change that like all Steiner teachers like really know of, and they educate themselves of, and they educate parents of. And then that's like the before the 9-year change and after the 9-year change. So I'm going to explain what the 9-year change is. So the 9-year change is when the pineal gland is decreasing, so it's shriveling, and the pituitary gland is signaling the body to start reproductive hormones to be processed through the body. So in that process, and it's also the point where the ahamkara, so this is out of Satyananda's work with spiritual children and everything, yoga education for children, the ahamkara is fully developed, and they have this realization at this 9-year mark that there's more than just the mother in the world. There's this development of the ego, so the perspective is shifting. So every child is an individual process and how it is reflected in children. Children sometimes they don't use eye contact, where before they may have been really, really focused on that. Sometimes it comes up physically in the body, where they feel it in their bones differently, or sometimes it comes up in just the way that they act towards their peers or act towards their parents. Sometimes there's trauma connected to it, this change of such a transformative change. They become, emotions come up in it. So there's definitely this marker of the 9-year change. And sometimes it happens before 9 years old. Sometimes it happens after 9 years old, but it's in that time frame. So then in a middle school classroom, it is assumed that they're already gone through that change, because that happens in about that happens around like 5th grade, 6th grade, in that area. So in the middle school classroom, if you're thinking about mindfulness, they're ready for silence. They're ready for those silent exercises where they can sit in silence for a minute, where they can follow their breath for a minute. So it's very different than before the upper elementary, lower elementary age range. Mindfulness there is not silent. Mindfulness is these little seeds of like, okay, we're going to start being quiet and reflecting and thinking and looking at the mind and like just kind of like seeing that it's there. In middle school, you can actually sit with them. You can actually sit and they can follow their breath. And as you can start with 1 minute, you can start with 3 minutes. So the key there is that their age is how many minutes they can sit in silence, but you have to build up to it. The mind has to be ready for that type of exercise. And I have to tell you, I've worked with middle schoolers before, and it's really, you have to build it up. You can't just say, be in silence for 10 minutes, because it's just not happening. It won't happen unless they know what to expect. And so that's an example of middle school, how you would approach mindfulness with middle schoolers.
So can I ask you a question? So for that mindfulness exercise, do they focus upon the breath? What are they asked to look at that would engage the mind? Are they looking at the fact that they have thoughts? Are they, what is their focus when they go into silence?
So there's many ways you can do this. So I just did this in a middle school classroom like 2 weeks ago. So I have them fold their hands on their desk and I have them look at their hands. So that's one way they could engage the mind, is looking at their hands. And if they feel ready, they can close their eyes. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they close their eyes and put their head down. Because there's so much happening with them developmentally, they're often not getting enough rest. There was so many studies done about how middle school and high school students need more sleep and later start times in the school day. So oftentimes, and the Montessori school that I worked at, they actually started their school day about 30 minutes later than the other grades, to accommodate that, because there is developmentally rise, they need more rest and they're just not getting it, and the school day is not accommodating to that developmental like step in their development, that developmental need that they have there. So if they put their head down, I totally let them put their head down. So you can have them fold their hands and they can look at their thumbs. You can give them an image to look at as well. I've done candle gazing with them. So giving them the image of the candle and having them look at the flame. That's one way you can do it as well. I've given them, we've done this with clay. We can put a piece of clay in their hand and they can, these methods, they really do quiet the mind. But the best I've seen though is if you put a candle in the middle of a group and you ask them to look at it, it's the quickest way to get a middle school class to be quiet, actually. So that works a lot. So really what you're looking at that with the mindfulness and asking them to be quiet and then occupying the mind, you're looking at the senses. How can you engage the hands? How can you engage the sight? How can you engage even aromatherapy? Even giving them like a little bit of aromatherapy would help as well.
Great. So then what about the other age groups?
So the littles, so they're actually, we're just planting the seed for the littles. So the littles, the way that they look at mindfulness is completely different than middle school, right? So in middle schoolers, where the expectation for them is to like have that engagement of whatever they're focusing on and through the senses. For the littles, they can actually move around. We're going to see later in the video that in about a little bit here, I was actually doing mindfulness, and that's the age group. Those are the little, so the first, second, and third graders. And they were up and around, they were wiggling a little bit, and that's all okay. That's all okay. The way that you instruct them, it's completely different. So you could do it through guided meditation. You could do through yoga nidra. I have actually done rotation of consciousness with them. But again, my expectation is that they're not going to sit there. It does not look like adults, does not look like middle schoolers. They're not going to sit there. If they wiggle around a little bit, if they're moving from one position to the next, that type of thing is actually very natural and very healthy. So we're just laying the seeds for them at that age range. After that, you can start. So when I'm instructing mindfulness, there's two things that I keep in mind. So there's this, you're either emptying the bowl and you're having that silent time, right? You're completely emptying, or you're guiding it with some sort of guided meditation, with some sort of something to keep their focus on as they go on. So the emptying part of it only happens in middle school. And every other age, you are guiding them along, whether it's through rotation of consciousness or yoga nidra. And some of the yoga nidras, I mean, again, a yoga nidra looks completely different, right? There's parts of it that you use, there's parts of it that you don't use, and the time frame. So when I'm with the 7, 8-year-old group, those groups, more than 10 or 15 minutes is too much. More like 10 minutes of just, less than 10 minutes of just yoga nidra, and that will really, really just start the seed of being mindful. So that's what we're doing. We're looking at just really building on those seeds.
Now, why is mindfulness a part of conflict resolution?
That's a great question. So I went into a classroom 2 weeks ago. This is the same classroom. I'm going to go back to middle school age range. And I was asked to go there by the principal. This is my son's school. And I'm going to tell a story here. So I do after school yoga, I do Peace Out Club. And one of my students in Peace Out Club was saying, he was having a bad day, and I just went up to him and I said, what's going on? I knew the student, and I felt comfortable going up to him, and he said, I got hit in the boys' bathroom. And I'm like, okay, whoa. And this is actually the second time I heard that something like this was happening. And I said, well, did you go to the teachers? What did you do? And he's like, nope, I didn't go to the teachers. I actually punched the kid back. And I said, wow, okay. And so he said, I don't feel good. And he was like, the reason I don't feel good is because I punched him back. Like, he punched me, and I was like, but then I punched him back, and that made me feel worse. And I kind of took that in for a moment. I was like, wow. Well, I went on and said, you really need to talk to someone about this. I know that you're talking to me, but maybe your teacher needs to know that this is happening, or maybe the principal needs to know that this is happening. And we talked for a little bit. Like, I had sat there and I talked to him for a little bit. I could tell he felt better after our conversation. But then immediately, so this is the school that my child goes to. So I'm thinking to myself, if this is happening, and my child is going to 7th and 8th grade next year, if this is happening, if this is the culture that is happening right now in those classrooms, I really need to do something. I really need to intercede. So I immediately emailed the principal, and the principal's a very gracious woman. And she said, why don't you go into the classrooms? Why don't you, I'm going to get you in touch with the counselor. Why don't you go into these classrooms, and, whatever you need to do, I'll support you whatever you need to do. And so from there, I went into the 6th grade classroom, and we talked about conflict resolution. I went into the 5th grade classroom and talked about conflict resolution. And I was in the classroom. I always started with mindfulness. So with that age group, I could say, okay, we're going to be silent for 1 minute. And my expectation of you is this high. This is my expectation. I'm like, even 5 minutes, we could do 5 minutes. And this is the time of the day when they're usually really noisy and they're usually really like everywhere. So I did that with the classes, and the counselor came up to me afterwards and he said, I've never seen them act like that during that time period. Like, I've never seen them. And he said, you know what? It's the mindfulness. It has to be the mindfulness. And I said, yeah, I totally, I agree with you. It is the mindfulness. And then, so he realized that the mindfulness got them into the place to be receptive, right? The mind is clear, got them in a place to actually learn how to listen. Because after we did those mindfulness exercises, we talked about listening, as being a big part of conflict resolution. We talked about their minds were ready to receive the information because they had taken the time to be quiet and to know what that meant to be quiet. So that made them more receptive to what was coming, the lessons that were coming next in anti-bullying lessons and the conflict resolution. So mindfulness is an important piece because they're experiencing for themselves what quiet is, even if it's just for a minute, and the mind is getting prepared to really listen to the lessons that come after whatever the mindfulness is. So there is a tie. And I think the connection too, I've tried to communicate with my students that there is that connection where peace really does begin within, and that we act in a way that is unconditional to the external part. And this is part of what I teach in conflict resolution. We are in this place of being unconditional in terms of the conditions around us don't matter. That as long as we're really mindful in what we're thinking, mindful in what we're doing, that is the starting of peace and peace culture. So a lot of times when I talk in schools, I always talk about peace culture, the culture of peace in the classroom, because I feel like that's really, really important. So that's the verbiage that I use.
So can you go a little bit more into the listening part, or the exercises, or how do you start teaching listening?
Yeah, we play a game. Yeah, that's how we start with listening. Everyone's played this game. Telephone, right? Have you played the telephone game? And so that's part of the lesson is I just go through what active listening looks like. And it's the same as when you're teaching it to adults. It's the same principles. It's eye contact. It's listening with your whole heart. It's listening like a friend. What does that mean? Friendship means. And it's fully engaging in the person that is speaking to you. And so we go through all of the things that make up active listening and listening fully. Teachers love when I was with two teachers, and because listening is a huge issue in education. Kids not listening, kids not, all of this, it's a classroom management thing, right? So to have it reiterated in this way, I think is much appreciated. So anyway, we go through the steps of listening to really, really, and then we start the game. So I always have phrases. And I build up first, I have like 2 or 3 words. Okay, if you guys, and these are 28 to 30 students that are going to do this game. So I always start simple, right? Because if they can remember 2 or 3 words, that's going through the whole classroom. And it's funny because it always morphs into something else. It's always, first or second twice, it always, the message always gets all tangled up and changed, and it becomes, from there it turns into a lesson about gossip. It turns into a lesson about not gossiping, it turns into a lesson about having a direct experience right? And valuing that direct experience and that direct perspective, and not valuing so much the perspective of what someone said, or someone said that someone said, or what someone said that someone said. So I expect the first time we do telephone game that the game will go hectic, because it pretty much happens all the time, where the message just gets completely switched. And so it becomes a lesson about, not gossiping, and it becomes a lesson about, perspective and everything. So that's a very simple way that I teach. I teach listening. There are other ways too that I've done it, where it's just, talking, practicing communication. And these children, especially the older kids, they're so used to doing this, and they're so used to communicating with a device, that communication skills, it's just paramount. They need that extra attention on verbally saying what they mean, and fully explaining what they're trying to say, and then in that term having a message and listening to someone else's message, and what all of that entails.
So it seems like from what you're describing that part of the foundation for conflict resolution is just developing very specific skills that are social skills, that are communication skills. And when a child has more of those to work with, that they're less likely they're going to have more tools to be able to work through or navigate challenges or differences or conflicts that may arise. Do you think that the technology world that we live in, and the technology that's infiltrated into our education system, may have something to do also with the lack of communication skills, the lack of social skills, the sense of isolation?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this year was a little bit unique, obviously, because of COVID and everything. The technology, well, there are alternatives too. So Waldorf education, there's no technology in Waldorf education. In Montessori education, there's limited technology in Montessori education. Montessori education is based on manipulatives and experiences. And so in Montessori philosophy is that the hands teach the brain. So I have close Montessori teacher friends that even through COVID, they use their manipulatives, even when it wasn't exactly advised to use the manipulatives. But in general, other than those two philosophies of education, yes, the public school system's overuse of technology and over dependency on technology is just, I disagree with it. And so I have a sister-in-law who is in human resources and administration in one of the districts in Phoenix, and her whole first and second grade, they're on computers all the time, and the teacher is just there to facilitate that, and that's their education model for her district. It's it's cause for concern. I really do think so. I feel like we can't avoid the technology, but we can definitely integrate other methods of learning for children. And not all children learn through technology. So I feel like another effect of this is that children are deprived of nature. There's this nature, they're deprived of nature. So there's actually a name for it. There's actually some sort of, it's slipping my mind at this moment, but you see this a lot with children in the cities, where they're not exposed to enough sunlight. They're not exposed to enough parks and trees and all that we kind of take for. I'm in northern Arizona, and I mean, it's all around us here, and the children go to parks and stuff. When I go down to Phoenix, and I've taught in Phoenix, there's very limited access to things that are just part of what I would say is part of childhood. I mean, environmental things that children need to be exposed to. You know, it's caused this kind of disconnect, not only from the environment, but also from their own bodies, right? From being present to their own feet, their own, you know, they're part, in recognizing that they are part of this bigger picture of nature, of environment. So yes, it is a problem. And I think educators are more aware of it. I really do. I think educators, even though we have admins that are, you know, really, really pushing technology and everything, but in the forefront, on the battleground, the teachers that have their classrooms, I think of them as they're right there. They're in the front lines of education. They're in the front lines. If you talk to those teachers one-on-one, they will tell you 100% that they will, you know, limit the technology, even though they may not have that type of you know, that type of go from their supervisor, from their admin. They will definitely advocate for less technology because attention spans are better, and they see it in the classroom. I mean, there was this discussion I had with my Montessori friends about how, like, their behavior is different. The behavior changes when they are not on technology as much. They're just, their overall mood, they're happy. And I think there are some studies to back that up as well. I mean, it's obvious to anybody who works with children, but also I think that they're starting to see that as well. The academics are.
So how about if at this point, if anybody would like to ask a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll take a few questions before we go on if you have something specific that you'd like to ask Ana, or something more general about conflict resolution, or a comment or a particular situation that you're dealing with, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, a teacher. So is anybody here that would like to ask a question? And so I think the easiest thing to do is to just raise the hand, right? If you go down to the bottom and you raise the hand. Okay. Yeah. All right. So how about if we go a little bit further with some of this? Maybe this is a good time for us to look at the video that Ana has made, and that may give you some more ideas of how she's working. So
Yeah. Should I frame it, Shraddha?
Go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and I will say one of the things too about this, we're going to, you know, watch a video that's around 10 minutes long. Ana's going to give you some things to sort of look for in this video. And the other thing is that if you have a comment as you're watching, why don't you use the chat to just note that, or if you have a question that comes up as you're watching. And then what we'll do is we'll look at that after we watch the video. So go ahead, Ana. How would you like to frame looking at this video?
Okay, great. So there's really 3 parts here. And when we're talking about peace in schools, we're talking really about building a peace culture in a school. And how do we do that? So we do that really practically by, first of all, the teachers have to be have this buy-in and having a peaceful culture in their school. So they need to talk about the peace. They need to talk about peacemakers. They need to engage in that dialogue with their students. So that's the 3rd part. There's the first part of the video shows the yoga, because I really do feel like connecting children with their bodies, it's really important. It's just really, really important to be able to have that connection, because they're making that connection that they are responsible and they're empowered in this body. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the mindfulness, and part 3 is the peace curriculum, putting them all together. So the yoga part, it keeps the teachers from being just talking heads, right? We don't just want to be out there saying to children, do this, do this, do this, and not really having it embodied, or not really having it, having the walk match the talk. So the yoga part is really important for children to make that connection, that it's in the body as well. It's peace in the body, peace in the mind, and then peace. There's all sorts of practical peace curriculum as well. And this all falls under the umbrella of social and emotional, emotional learning. That's why the video is framed in 3 sections.
Great. Okay, so Heather, do you mind going ahead and starting the video? And I will, hold on, I guess we're gonna,
You both can stay there if it's easier.
okay? Okay, all right.
I'm gonna press play. I don't know. I have.
You had your head. Do you have your headphones on, maybe?
I don't have mute on.
Ana, since there doesn't seem to be audio, do you want to go ahead and speak over?
Yeah, sure.
Why don't you do that? That would be perfect.
Okay, great. So here is the mindfulness for the littles here. And these are first, second. I don't really actually think I have any 3rd graders in here. I think these are all first, second graders, so 5 and 6-year-olds here. And you can tell that it's definitely different. You see someone's, legs going up. You see another one making, you know, the mat into like a blanket. So this is just something that when I'm training my children's yoga teachers, I really want to communicate with them that this type of thing is okay. A lot of times teachers are so strict with discipline, right? There's this thing where teachers feel like they have to be super strict, and it just kind of just depends on the students actually. But when we're talking about mindfulness, we want to give them the freedom. We want to give them the freedom to experience mindfulness in their own timing. We want to give them the freedom to experience mindfulness in their own way. And as long as we're, especially for this age range, as long as we're just planting the seed for them or introducing it to them, they're going to have a journey with this work that's beyond what I can control, beyond what anybody can control. I mean, years later, they can be like, oh, now I remember what she meant when she said this, or, oh, I remember when we were doing this mindfulness exercise and it felt really nice. I've had students come to me and say, you know, Miss Ana, that's my favorite part of my day is when I'm doing mindfulness. And every child has their own journey with the mindfulness, has their own journey with yoga. So even though I may not immediately see it like right there in the class, I know, and I have to keep faith in my heart that the things that I'm teaching them, it's really sinking deeper where they can access it later. So we do a lot of loving kindness, mindfulness. I do that on a daily basis with my students. Here's again, they're wrapped up in like blankets and the mats and everything. And they're like, this is typically what mindfulness looks like for this group. The day of that recording, they're a little bit more active and stuff. So now we're going into the peace studies. We skipped the yoga, we're going into peace studies here. So I'm really excited about the peace studies element of this. So we do a whole unit on peace flags. These are some examples of their peace flags. We talk about the peace flags in Tibet. We talk about all sorts of peace flags as like a pre-activity for them actually doing their own peace flags. And these are just some examples of the peace flags that they do and what the colors mean. And we do a whole thing. So this is an anti-bullying pledge that the children take. And you're going to see actually a group of children actually saying the pledge. And this is what we start off with: what gives me peace? I really want the children to think about how they are empowered for themselves and what brings them peace. Some of them say music, some of them say my puppy, some of them say parents. So we go through a lot of books and talk about environmental issues. We talk about these are the books that I use for the curriculum as well. And Finding Om is one of my favorites. I actually went to school with Rashmi Bismarck, who's the author of that. We talk about the 4 parts of the mind. Again, it's not just for adults. We actually dive into the 4 parts of the mind. So I really want the children to know that they have an intuition. I want them to know that they can listen to their voice within. So that's part of that. And again, I'm going through it quickly here, but we use a lot of time on these things. So these are the steps that I use with the children. Again, more on the anti-bullying pledge. These are for the younger kids. The other one was for the older kids, upper elementary and middle school kids. And they actually say the pledge, they sign it, they post it in the room. Again, this is for the older kids here. And so here's some examples of them saying their pledge together. And they say it in groups of 2 or groups of 3. And then I usually give this to the principal so she can see what kind of work and the anti-bullying pledge. So when I was the peace coordinator at that Montessori school, the whole school took the pledge. And here they are there. That's the pledge, and they're putting out construction paper. I try to integrate as much art in it as possible. So I try to integrate a lot of art into that's a Montessori thing. Here also, this is the community service. So there's a community service aspect of peace. And these children are doing some science for the Teacher Appreciation Week. And this was a really all ages type of group. I have middle schoolers in here, and I have some third graders in here as well. So this was a all ages group, and they're doing community service by doing these teacher appreciation signs. So I really wish you guys could hear this. This is them doing their this is them doing their Light a Candle for Peace song, and they learn the sign language for this. They sing it for their peers. They act it out. It's just a really sweet thing that they do. And again, some are more like the little girl in the front, she's singing it, she's just not doing the sign language for it. But again, part of this is recognizing International Day of Peace, which is September 21st. And I bring in things so we could celebrate the International Day of Peace and Day of Ceasefire. And we also talk about Earth Day. So those are kind of like the two bookends of the peace curriculum. One is the International Day of Peace on one end and Earth Day on the other end. So lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. Establishing lasting peace is the work of education. I cannot emphasize that and talk about that. I love to talk about Dr. Montessori and, that aspect of it, and how intuitive she was to know that, and you have to know that Dr. Montessori was alive during World War II. So she's Italian, and she really had this deep insight that education could do more to prevent wars, to really foster peace than politicians. And I agree with her like 300%. I feel like, gosh, if we could really, I know that Montessori schools really put it on the priority, but if we could really have more of it in public schools, if we can really talk more about it, establishing peace culture in public schools, it's just, I feel really passionate about these things. And I think the children are ready. These children are children that know and that just have this inner vision of, and they're ready for things to change, and they're ready for for just a better environment, better place. And we see that, that's Malala, and that's, Greta Thunberg, and, we see it with the activists, children activists that are out there that are just saying, we're going to take this into our own hands. This is the new generation of children that we're dealing with. We're dealing with this new generation of children that they know what they want. They're very focused on it. They want to get things done. They're not concerned with procedure. They're not concerned with, they really are spiritually minded children that need more attention on things like this, the social and emotional learning aspects, because they are driven. They're really driven in what they're here to do. They have this, hopefully they have this sense of purpose. Now, again, there are children out there that have been, have trauma, so they're not completely clear, but they're still spiritual. They're still seeking, but yeah. So I see a hand up. Sydney. Hi. Hi, Sydney.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is just a comment and a question. I believe that all good things start at the grassroots level, and I really commend you for what you're doing. My question is, with all the awareness now on infrastructure being expanded to include things like education and early child care and things like that, is there anyone advocating on a federal level for introducing these kinds of things into public education?
No, no, there isn't. What it's coming out of is there are people out there who are pushing for social and emotional learning standards. And if you look that up, you'll see a rough document of standards, but that is really not widespread. You know, you won't go to Cornville or Sedona, Red Rock High School and see the teachers out saying, okay, what social emotional learning standard are we doing now? No, it's not. There's a small group of teachers that are taking it on. But what I would love to see is I would love to see something out of a peace standards for elementary school and middle school and high school. That's what I would do. I would love to see. I would love to see an actual document that is, you know, created specifically for teachers to say, what peace standard are we going to meet this week? What peace standard are we going to do this?
Right.
And maybe it comes out of something like if there's a Department of Peace somehow, or if there's something like that that happens.
I was just wondering if there was anything in the works. It occurs to me that it takes a special kind of teacher, and you are one of those, to actually foster a program like this, because it would drive me crazy. I mean, and Sraddha, you know me well enough to know I like order and I like discipline, and working with children has, you know, everything to do with that. But you also have to have the kind of personality that can work with that. So I really hope that this takes off and that it can elevate,
Thank you.
yeah, at a faster rate. It's really needed. Yeah, that's
Thank you.
all.
I have a question around that as well, which is that, did you work with other teachers in the charter school? It sounded like you were in charge of aspects of this, but of course, everybody had to do part of the program in their own classrooms.
Yeah.
What was the response by the teachers, and what kinds of, did they have any outcomes that they talked about with you?
Yeah, they're really, at the charter school in particular, they were very, very open, and they saw firsthand with the peace curriculum, how it worked in their classroom and how it integrated so flawlessly. And, you know, before I was the peace coordinator, there was another teacher that was a peace coordinator. So Montessori schools have this long history of really, really putting emphasis on peace curriculum, but not in the way that I was doing. I was doing it with the yoga, and I was doing with the mindfulness as well. So I was merging all these three things together. But because they saw the immediate results, so the results are what? The results are, of course, the measurable, big measurable one. We didn't have any bullying, so they could see that. The middle school, you know, I had two girls. I was a middle school teacher as well while I was doing all of this. It was a lot, but I had two girls who came in from other schools, and they were kicked out of other schools. One was was kicked out because of drug issues. The other one was kicked out because of sexting issues. And so they both came into we let them in the school with the you know, notion, okay, you're going to do this program, and, you know, we're aware of the past and everything, but you're going to do this program, and we'll see how it goes. We're going to do you're entering into our middle school on a probationary, you know, time frame. That whole school year, we had no issues with them. We had nothing happened. They weren't, you know, behavior issues. There wasn't any kind of sex texting going on. There wasn't any kind of, you know, drug things that we were aware of. I mean, and they merged into the culture. That's why I keep on going back to the culture part of it, because it's really important. They merged into the culture of our school and the culture, the peace culture that we had established so flawlessly, that it allowed them to thrive. Whereas in another school setting, they would not have thrived or been as successful. So when teachers see that, I mean, the middle school teachers that I worked with, we recognized that. We had a lot of conversations about these two students, and we're like, look, they're doing great. Look what they're doing. They're actually academically, they're thriving. Socially, they're thriving. They actually became best friends, the two that came out of other schools into. So, and they were doing the mindfulness, they were doing the yoga, they were, we were doing the peace curriculum, everything, every part of it was, in place and integrated. And us as a middle school staff, we were looking at like, this is great, this is amazing. And so the teachers reflect upon how it's working. What I saw is that they really do reflect upon, even the teachers that I just worked with 2 weeks ago, when I talked to them and have conversations, one of the teachers said, I wish we would have done this in the beginning of the school year, because she could see immediately the results of it. And as long as teachers have these tools that they can use that are really, really giving them results immediately, because the mindfulness works that way, then they say, oh, that's valuable. That's a really, really valuable piece that, what? And then, she invited me back into her classroom for next year at the beginning of the year. So, and she said, and my, the other grade would love to have you too. And so it just kind of, the teachers, I think they, when they see the results of it, when they see what the mindfulness does, when they see that these children that in other places are being not thriving or not being successful, then they go into an environment where their peace culture is really, really being embraced. And not only that, you have to show there's this element of working with children where you love them. You just, you care about them. You care about where they're going. You care about, what they're doing day by day. You care about, what they're studying. There's this sense of like really, of really taking them under your wing and showing them that type of love and care and compassion.
What were some of the challenges that you've had in this? What was the biggest challenge or the biggest resistance or the biggest in your experience of this?
I think this is a really good question. I've had parents come up to me and say, I'm so glad that you're doing this. I'm so glad that my child is doing this. But I have had one or two parents who've been very resistant and not so much about yoga, not so much about peace, about the mindfulness. I remember at Sedona Charter, I had one group of parents that just really wanted to have a meeting with me and wanted to know, what are you doing in terms of mindfulness? What exactly is this about? And they ended up taking their child out of the program. But this is kind of a funny story because yes, and I laid out, when I'm faced with that type of conflict, I want to lay out to the parents, this is the research. This is what research is saying about mindfulness and meditation. And I'll point you to Sarah Lazar and her work out of Harvard and what they're saying about it and everything. So I come prepared with all of that, but I also, I completely respect what the parents say, what they have to say and what they do. In this case, the parents took the child out of the program. She was not to do any mindfulness or yoga or anything like that. And she was supposed to go to other places. Somehow, though, the child would sneak into the class anyway and like do the mindfulness and do the activities with the peace curriculum with the children. And I had this conversation with one of the teachers. I'm like, I thought so-and-so was not supposed to be in the class. And they're like, I know, but she wants to be in the class. I mean, there was definitely a disconnect between the parents and the child, because the child somehow got into my class a couple of times. And, I had to have a conversation with her. And I said, your parents don't want you in this class. You really have to make sure that you're, somewhere else during this time, or, your other teacher said you're supposed to go here. And we had the conversation. And after having the conversation with her, she just said, I actually really like mindfulness. I really like doing those exercises. And I had to respect the parents, of course, but it gave me this insight on that that parenting relationship needs to be fostered, and the child needs to be heard. There was a miscommunication. There was not definitely a connection between that was happening there. So although I had a little giggle about it because she always made her way back into my class, I had to really respect the parent. So I think that was one of my biggest points of resistance in doing this. But on a bigger level, I think to get this type of program growing, I think that teachers feel very, very overwhelmed by the academic aspect. And to ask a teacher to do one more thing, or to, think about one more thing, I think that's another point of resistance for teachers implementing things like this in their classroom. Teachers are overworked. They're completely overwhelmed with academics. They're completely overwhelmed with things that they keep adding more tasks to their job description. I mean, there's a lot going on as a role of a teacher in a classroom. So I think if we, on a bigger scale, if we really want to implement this into the classroom, there really has to be some outside person coming in and helping the teacher out and supporting the teacher, and really being proactive in that way. Because I know when I was in the classroom, I was in that capacity. To ask me to do one more thing would be really, really tough. So in the ideal situation, someone else would come in and there would be funding for it. There would be, all sorts of these logistical elements to it to get it really so that it's the easiest thing that a academic teacher can implement.
So do you want to just see in the chat, Jennifer has mentioned something. She just wrote a comment about something that's going on. Can you see that, Ana?
Yeah, I could see it. There's a group that started in LA, Gaia, yes, for schools, where mindfulness is brought into inner city schools. They're trying to grow as an organization. They are not as comprehensive as what you are doing. Yeah, this is a movement. This is happening. It's not exactly the way that I'm doing it, but yes, mindfulness is definitely movement. Goldie Hawn has an organization called Mind Up. That's all mindfulness as well. I really feel like education is ready for it. But they're not exactly getting the whole picture of it. The mindfulness, yes, is definitely happening. They need the yoga, they need the peace aspect, the Montessorian aspect of it as well. So they need the whole picture of it. So I'm excited for groups that are doing this, and I love that they're putting the mindfulness into education and everything. But I really want, when I'm training teachers, I really we're talking about the whole child in peace. We're not just talking about one aspect of it. We want the whole child to be educated physically. We want them to feel peace in their body. We want them to feel peace in their mind. And then the peace curriculum is just a method for them to know how it can serve into society, right? How we talk about Gandhi, we talk about Martin Luther King. So great. That's great that's happening in LA. And there's a lot that's happening in terms of these organizations putting in integrating these practices. And I always wonder, I haven't taken a mindfulness training from Goldie Hawn's organization or from anything. I wonder what perspective they're doing it from. And that's something that I'm always been curious, because the perspective that I'm doing it from is very yogic, and it's from my experiences.
I just wanted to, point out in this that, of course, in the conflict resolution and in yoga training, there is this idea that holism comes from the use of the right and the left brain. And so when we look at the technology that's using the left brain predominantly. And then when you look at the right brain, that's usually where sort of movement, and that's where the yoga would come in, or dance or PE or art. And so when you see education systems where there's a funding issue, we usually see that all of the subjects that belong to the right brain get tossed out.
Right. Mhm.
And the value or the priority is the structural logic learning that happens out of the left brain, and that takes priority. So there's a bigger issue about recognizing what it means to have balance by proper use of the brain. And this is one of the reasons why doing the physical yoga is important alongside the studies of being quiet, being reflective, mindfulness, listening. All of those really belong to this other side of the brain. And so we're really looking at kind of a bigger value discussion of like what's important. And and standards. So as we, as human beings, as we evolve, maybe the balance will become more important than having people who are incredibly smart in one capacity, or very, very gifted in an intellectual capacity, but they're emotionally and socially incapable of integrating or being around other people. And frankly, a lot of people who are very skilled in computer tend to go in that direction of being brilliant, in those ways, but there's something that's missing in terms of their relationships. So, this is a piece that the yoga brings in, the importance of that integration of the brain.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and that's so true. We really want to have that whole perspective, the whole child, the yoga as being part of it. Great.
Well, can you say a little bit about, what your future is, and you've created a teacher training program we have a yoga teacher training program that was something that we started at the center and you're continuing with. And then do you want to share about what it is that you're doing in terms of training people in this area or?
Sure. Yes. So I'm training, I have 4 students that I'm working with right now. And so we go through the yoga and we go through the mindfulness, and the peace curriculum is an elective part of it. So it's integrated. I talk about it all throughout, but it's also just like integrated into everything else. So the training on this is really about how it's interesting. It's really about how to transform your own childhood things and to be of service to children. I feel like people who go through children's yoga teacher training have to be kids again or have to learn how to play again. There's something in their childhood that they have to learn, or kind of like something gets brought to the surface to kind of get resolved during children's yoga teacher training. And I found too, with the training, it's a lot of play, like this look at play, because the best way to connect with children is to play, is to have that deep sense of play with them, to hold that childlike wonder and that connection with just curiosity, right? Because children are endlessly curious. So I take that perspective. We do a lot of play. We do a lot of observing children. We just kind of visit the developmental stages and reflect upon them for ourselves. Like every time I do a training, I reflect upon my 9-year change, what happened during that time. And I invite all of you out there to think about if there's something pivotal that happened at 8 or 9 and 10, and kind of reflect upon that time and see what changed and what really, what was the transformation all about? And yeah, I think about my son's 9-year change, and when he was actually he at 8 years old, he was in the hospital. He had a really severe infection and he was in Phoenix Children's Hospital for 11 days. And that was that pivotal moment for him. So we reflect upon that, but we also, that's like the first part of course, we go through yoga, children's yoga asana and all that stuff, but also the second part is just really being of service to children. What does that mean? How do we empower children, and how do we unconditionally love them? You know, this is another aspect of it that is so enriching for me to reflect upon and to share. I'll just share this one thing. When I was doing my Waldorf education training, this part of the Steiner teachers, part of it is that you pray for your children. And every night before you go to bed, you go through the list of the children that you're working with, and you hold them in this light, and you pray for them, and you send like love to them. And, you know, I did my Waldorf training. I had already been in like maybe 10 classrooms or 10 years of classrooms before I did my Waldorf training. And it dawned on me, why hadn't I really thought about that before? You know, of course I cared for the children that have been in my care and that I've taught throughout the years. But during doing that training, it really dawned on me that we're holding children in our hearts, that as teachers, we are even, you know, we have a parenting aspect of teaching them as well. And that's may even just be more important than teaching them academics. So I remember thinking, gosh, that is such a simple thing that you can do for the children in your life, but it's so profound. If you are unwaveringly optimistic for the children that you're working with, if you're thinking about them every night before you go to bed and you're going through the list of them and you're thinking, oh, just sending them that love, or sending them that compassion, even if during the day I've had kids kick me in the face. I've had kids like I had a child in Phoenix just flip over his desk and just ran out the door. You know, I had a little girl in Waldorf school here just down the street kick me in the face. She was underneath her desk and she was kicking me. And even in those severe circumstances, we're asked to unconditionally love them, and we're asked to unconditionally, you know, be with them and teach them and be that mentor and hold them in the light. So that's another aspect that I really love to share as part of training, because I think that the children today need that. They need someone to really like be their cheerleader and be there holding them energetically in the light and holding them to this high expectation. That's another aspect. When we're doing this type of work with children, we're holding them at a high aspect of character here. We want them to really succeed. We see them succeeding, holding them up here. Social, we do that with academically, right? For children, academically, we always say, oh, you get A's, you get like, you know, there's some sort of incentive for that. In my classes, I will really hold them equally just as high for their social and emotional learning. Like when we're going through and we're doing the mindfulness, I, you know, hold them accountable for that. Or when we're doing our peace conflict resolution, we'll go through scenarios. That's part of the peace curriculum. I hold them accountable for that, you know? So we want to show them that we are, you know, we're their cheerleaders, and they're, you know, we're there supporting them, but we have this high standard for them to have their own responsibility in it too, that they're self-empowered as well. So that's all. So the first part of the training is really on top of like the really logistical, like yoga asana teaching to kids and different anatomy and physiology for kids. But I think the big picture that I'm really wanting to do with these trainings is just to serve children in this way, that we're holding them safe, because a lot of children don't feel safe. So if we're holding them with this sense of love, this holding them with the sense of, I'm holding you accountable this high for how you're treating each other in the class, then they have this sense of safety. They feeling safe and grounded.
Well, it's certainly a different way to approach kind of ethics or morality or good behavior, which I think many of us understand the withholding of love as a way to get children to behave. That's a very common one that goes on. And then, there's also suppression. Suppress something, like this is the way, suppress the feelings of anger, suppress the feelings. That's another one that's very old. Many people are dealing with suppression from childhood as well, that they're working out as adults. And so it seems like there's got to be a balance where children are being asked to also emotionally discipline, mentally find discipline, because that's an aspect, physically have some discipline. And there may be other ways into good behavior than what it is that we've grown up with, that's more common as a way of, how do you manage the energy? How do you manage the creativity? How do you manage the things that you don't know about that are going on at home, that are then being played out, or children are acting out something that you aren't actually even aware of where the root of that is. So this is definitely a yogic perspective of looking at children, what's healthy in terms of the growth of the human being, from this stage on.
Yeah. From like energetic point of view, when you're managing children, like attracts like. So if you're like a drill sergeant to children, you're going to get their drill sergeant right out, right? We see that all the time. I've been in classes where the drill sergeant is the teacher, and the kids they are repressed at first, because I think that was the classroom management model for years and years, very old style management model, where the teacher is the drill sergeant, and the children are listening and quiet and mute. Whenever I go into a classroom and the children's completely silent, I know there's a problem there. But that's just a side. But what happens in those cases? The energy has to go somewhere, right? The energy has to go somewhere. So what do? They repress it, and then it bursts out in some way, shape, or form. So what we're really working with in doing it this way, we're working with having a heart-to-heart connection with children, but we're also working with children empowering themselves, actually stopping and making the choice to maybe be disciplined in their academics, having that kind of freedom. But also there's resilience in that too. There's that if we're giving them the choice to do it and they're doing it, they're academically being successful, and then they'll see, oh, I could do it. We're helping them with their self-confidence. We're helping them with their self-responsibility. So I've seen it time and time again. If you go towards children, attacking them, or being a drill sergeant, it just doesn't work. It's just the energy has to burst out. And but it's funny because there are still many drill sergeants in education, and sometimes the drill sergeant comes out in me. Sometimes, every once in a while, I'll come out, and I'm not completely exempt from it. Everyone has their days of that. But what I see though too is when other teachers see like the drill sergeant coming out, or they kind of think that you're weak for not doing that drill sergeant thing. I've had teachers like have that judgment, and then I'm like, no, that's not actually what's happening. I'm actually exercising strength by not having that drill sergeant come out. I'm exercising my own inner, like, not even control. It's just knowing that if I'm calm, they will be calm. If I'm in this place of my heart, they will be in the place of the heart. Whatever I'm projecting out to them, they're going to give it right back to me. That's just like attracts like in that.
Great. So would you want to just tell, would you just maybe either put into the chat box your website or
Sure.
where you can be found if people were interested in going further with studying, if they have an interest in working with children and such, combining yoga and conflict resolution and mindfulness and all of those pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, I just put it in the chat, and yeah, so thank you, Sraddha. I think, Sraddha, you really put like a fire under me. In 2013, I wasn't even thinking of doing any of, kids yoga trainings or 95-hour nothing, 100-hour or anything. And I want to thank you for really lighting that fire under me and kind of saying, do it, And I feel like that was that was really important for me to do. So I want to thank you for lighting that spark.
Well, one of the things, and I've said this to you before, I feel it would be so wonderful to be able to see what you've put together, to be able to go further, to grow exponentially, because it's something that I think that would fill something that's not being filled in the educational system. And again, from the point of view that our, children really, they're resilient, but the way that they can thrive when they're given what they need, it's very important, I would think, to everybody in our society to really focus and put attention on our children and see what is it that can be done here. And, these are important times. Things are being seeded in these, at these ages. And it makes a big difference into what kind of a world we create in the future. And certainly conflict is a very large part of what's going on in our world right now. And, where we can, one of the places we can start is in our school systems, in our homes and such, because as it's been said, the politics does not seem to have a good record of solving these issues. It seems to be important to, work like we've talked about at the grassroots. And so it's a very, very important calling in Dharma. So thank you so much for taking that on. I tell the story often that when I taught Magic Kingdom, which was the kids yoga class, of course, I set it up so I had to teach it because there wasn't anybody else who wanted to teach it. And I was like, well, it has to be taught, so I'll teach it. Mm-hmm. And it was the day that the students, we had everything in the room. They loved coming. They had a freedom. We also had poles. We had, straps and belts and pillows and yoga mats and everything. And it was a free for all. And we did a lot of storytelling. And the day that I got tied to the post with yoga bells is the day I decided to stop teaching the Magic Kingdom, that I needed to find somebody else to do it. So I'm really grateful that you've taken on that role, because it is a special person that is working with children and, carrying that torch. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Can I say one more thing?
Of course.
So the children at this time, it's COVID time, they've been disconnected from their friends in a lot of ways. They've been online more than usual. They really there's a lot of depression among children. My sister-in-law just told me about my niece who's going through depression. She's a senior in high school, but she didn't have a regular senior year, like everyone. I think that children, if you have a child in your life, if you nieces and nephews, sons or daughters, whatever you have in your life, I really think just lift them up a little bit more, think about them. Remember, we were talking about just holding them in that space because they need help. You know, I think because of everything that's happened, all the changes, the rapid changes that's happened in the last year, if we can hold them and just see that they can, you know, and they can overcome whatever comes their way. They're resilient. They can overcome because like my grandmother used to say, and she's on the other side, but I actually talk to her more now than I ever have talked to her. But she used to say that wherever there's children, there's God. And I believe that. I really, really believe that they are taken care of, but they just need a little bit more help, more than usual, because of the time that we're going through right now. So if you have a child in your life, then just hold them up in that light, and just give them extra attention and extra love during this time.
Great. That's a wonderful way to sort of complete. Is there a chant that you do with the children at all when you have classes? Do you do any type of mantra work?
I do. Well, I mostly work in public schools, but I do May All Be at Peace.
Okay. Do you want to just lead that through us, or just tell us how to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and actually my children are at the place where they can lead it. So I don't actually lead in where they lead it, but I will lead it here. So just go ahead. I'm going to go through inhale and exhale. And may all be at peace. And then you can say, may all be at peace. May all be happy.
May all be happy.
And may all be healthy.
May all be healthy.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sraddha.
Yes. Thank you everyone for being part of this. And Heather, is there anything that we need to complete with at all?
No, we are all set. Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone who attended.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Thank you, everybody. We will be in touch.